January 7th of 2025, tragedy struck in California as wildfires broke out across LA County and well into others within the state of California. These wildfires have caused numerous amounts of damages, with the Palisades fire destroying 6,800 structures and over 23,000 acres of land, the Eaton fire destroying 9,000 buildings and over 14,000 acres of land, and the Hughes fire totaling 10,000 acres of land destroyed. These three fires have caused 28 deaths with an unknown amount of injuries. NBC News explains that these wildfires erupting on the 7th of January have only continued to spread and have been exacerbated by multiple policies within the state of California and lack of emergency preparedness. We can pinpoint various reasons on why these fires started and have continued to burn. However, this is nothing new to California, as they've been struck by tragedy multiple times, dating back to 2018 to the Camp Fire and 2021 to the Thomas Fire. But this leads us to ask today's question on what infrastructure changes should be made from the latest wildfires in California. And my answer to this is dependent on the three biggest reasons on why these wildfires started. Firstly, looking at the forest and environmental management policies in California, or the lack thereof. Secondly, looking at utility improvement in California, specifically on power lines. And finally, making housing changes across LA County and other places in California to prevent this from happening again. But first, it's important to look back at the forest and environmental management changes that California needs to be making. Historically, California has had a problem of underperforming prescribed burns and fuel management strategies within forests and around forests. We can look to QKED, as they announced in October of 2024 that California would be stopping prescribed burns from this point moving forward into the foreseeable future. This is the issue. When California isn't making prescribed burns, it's allowing these shrubberies and trees, etc., to continue to build up, while prescribed burns are historically quite controversial in the state of California. Performing none at all with such a high risk of fire has only exacerbated the situation. Furthermore, California does not have fuel reduction strategies in place, including the thinning of trees and removing dead trees, branches, and shrubbery across these forests and even into city limits. Not having fuel reduction strategies is only going to enable these fires to continue to build and grow, not only in speed, but also in strength. And finally, with reforestation efforts, it's key that California switches back to replanting native plants and fire-resistant plants in forests and in residential areas as well. City Journal explains that LA was the city built to burn because of how much non-native plants were spread about. It made it 10 times easier for the fire to gain traction and continue to burn. So with looking at the lack of prescribed burns and fuel management strategies and not having fire resistant and native plants to California, it's easy to see how fast these fires could pick up that speed and continue to burn. Making these simple switches allows for these fires to lose that traction and make it manageable for the city and for firefighters. But secondly, it's important to look at the power line systems and utility grids within California. It's well known that power lines are an issue in California. When we look at BBC News of this year, we can look back to the 2018 Camp Fire that devastated California and the Thomas Fire in 2021 that were both pinpointed to power line issues. Also, with this new fires in 2025, we can look to the Eaton Fire, which has been predicted to be started from a power line issue. With these power lines actively causing a problem in the state of California, it's essential that we improve these utilities. This is including vegetation management, with clearing vegetation around these utility lines, and keeping it up to date, along with clearing vegetation around houses, buildings, and etc. to stop this from quickly grabbing a hold. Secondly, implementing smart grids that turn off on high fire risks and enable California to have better control on what electricity is moving through the state with these fires and high fire risks. And finally, moving power lines underground. While it is a bit of a feat, California has historically had the issue of power lines causing these problems. So moving these power lines underground and allowing for a much easier management of power lines in the state it's easy to see that this is a switch that needs to be made, especially when we can pinpoint major fires in the state to power lines. So with moving them underground and switching to better of a smart grid and having more of that vegetation management around these utility lines, it's going to work against these fires and allow them to have a better control and a reduced risk of fire starting in high risk times. And finally, looking at the housing changes that need to be made when rebuilding the city, and specifically with this infrastructure. Firstly, the state needs to rebuild slowly, and this is the key point. They cannot rush to put houses back up because they will be making mistakes. We need to look at NBC News that explains that creating buffer zones between these houses and wildland is extremely important. Restricting house building in these high-risk zones, similar to what we saw in the county of LA, and also spacing these homes apart so we're no longer having houses back to back to back. And finally, utilizing new codes of conduct. Codes of conduct were updated in 2008 in the state of California to switch to more fire-resistant management strategies, yet buildings had not been updated to match those. This includes having safer materials, indoor sprinkler systems, and dual-pane windows to improve the quality of the houses while also managing the fire risk of if a house were to start on fire. All of these codes of conduct needs to be updated and put into all new buildings moving forward. This never happened when it got switched in 2008, so this is the perfect time for the state of California to make these switches. So now, we've looked at the 3 big reasons on why the fires were predicted to have started and fueled to this problem, including the lack of forest management, utilities and improvement on the utility systems, and changes in infrastructure and housing. It's clear to see the answer of today's question on what infrastructure changes should emerge from the latest wildfires in California. And my answer is we need to improve in these 3 areas in the state of California to really truly enable fires, to stop enabling fires and to make a change in moving forward in these environmental strategies. While this has been an extreme tragedy, it's the perfect moment for California to actually learn and move forward and rebuild.